If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong, here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, well, aging. In this episode, Corbin and I discuss the benefits and limitations of walking for physical and psychological health.
So I took advantage of some of the sunlight that we had the other day after work, and I ended up going on a walk, and it was amazing. I hadn't been on a walk in a really long time. I actually think walks are completely underrated. I don't think we give walks enough credit, but I think if we're going to do a podcast based off of aging well and exercise and fitness and overall health, I think it would be super beneficial to kind of bring up walking. I think walking kind of covers the basics of everything that we kind of stand for. I mean, if you think about it, it burns a lot of calories. It's low impact, easy on the joints, and certain studies that are out there, it actually helps with diabetes, excuse me, and lowering stress levels. So let's dive right into that. Let's talk about walking. Let's talk about the benefits of walking. Let's compare and contrast walking versus running. What are your thoughts on these?
Okay, first I got to ask you, the last time you talked about walking was in regards to hangovers. So I'm hoping that after our last episode that's not the case.
That was not the case at all.
Okay, that's good. So what would you like to talk about with walking?
Well, let's talk about the actual act of walking itself and relating it to a form of cardiovascular exercise. I know there's a lot of bodybuilders, for example, that prefer walking over running as their main staple of cardio. I also think that this would be really beneficial for our elderly community. I know walking definitely is really low impact on joints, and honestly, it's easy to do and it's completely free. So I think it would be a great foundation for anyone starting their exercise journey is getting up and moving and basically walking.
Yeah, with cardio in general, I think there is quite a bit of a continuum in terms of what is beneficial for health and which is beneficial for performance. And I think for any beginner, just simply moving to a level more than they have been moving is going to have a benefit in improving cardiovascular health. If you recall from physiology of exercise, the two ways that we improve our cardiorespiratory fitness is by increasing our stroke volume and our arteriovenous oxygen difference. So the ability to deliver oxygen to the tissue and the ability to extract that oxygen and utilize it at the muscle level. And so the more unfit you are, the greater the benefit walking is going to be for cardiovascular health. The more fit you become, the less it really suits improving your VO2. But that being said, obviously people need to be walking more. We are an extremely sedentary society. The more we can walk, the better. There is a rule that I probably also taught you in PhysicX called the 100 kilocalorie rule, that states that whether you are running, jogging, or walking, the average person is burning about 100 kilocalories. So obviously that's going to be variable based on body weight and slight variability based on intensity. But as a general rule of thumb, that seems to work. I mean, obviously, somebody well over 200 pounds is going to be burning more than somebody, say, 150 pounds. But with that, if you are looking to lose body fat, which is why bodybuilders will favor walking over more intense versions of cardio, because they're there to burn the calories. And you're going to burn the calories, it just takes longer. If you can walk a mile in 15 minutes, it's going to take you an hour to do 4 miles. If you can run a 6-minute mile, it's going to take you 24 minutes in order to do that same amount of exercise. But obviously there's probably better cardiovascular benefits in the running versus the walking. When it comes to, again, the bodybuilder doing the walking, it is a much smaller stress or lesser stress on the body when they are doing that to burn the calories. And any activity that we do requires some level of recovery. And so the more intense the cardio they're doing, the more it's going to take away from recovering their muscle hypertrophy goals, or recovering from their exercise for muscle hypertrophy goals. And so that's a big consideration in there. And so as we consider what type of activity we do, we really have to kind of sit back and say, okay, what are the goals? And obviously, the more we can walk, I think the better. I think if you go to the grocery store and you're parking in a handicapped spot and you're not handicapped because you want to be closer to the store, that is not helping you, and it's flat out rude. But if you want to get some health benefit, park as far away as you can from the store, even if it's only 100 yards further. Walking to the store and back, that's 200 yards. You're approaching, that's almost an eighth of a mile. So I'm not going to do the math, how many calories that is, which is about 12 and a half calories, say about 12 calories. You're doing that every time you're walking that distance more every day. 12 calories a day is adding up. But if you're doing it every time you're in that situation, chances are that's multiple times a day. By the end of the week, you may be accumulating an extra 1,500 kilocalories or maybe even more. So walking more is great. I think there is a certain relaxation effect of walking. During COVID, one of the benefits I've found one of the many benefits actually of being home during COVID, I kind of actually enjoyed the work benefits of not having to commute to work, but because I wasn't commuting an hour each way, I have a lot more time to exercise. And so I started walking the dogs. We have 2 dogs. People would ask me, why do you walk them separately? Do they not walk well together? It's like, no, I get more exercise. I get more physical activity, I would say, not really exercise. But, I'm walking them probably each about 1.5 miles a piece. So every day I'm getting in 3 miles of walking. That's 300 kilocalories. That's pretty easy to do, and it's fairly relaxing and not stressing on my body.
So kind of talking about the category of burning fat and bringing oxygen in throughout the entire blood, I can only assume it would actually bring in more oxygen if you're walking versus a full-on sprint, right? Because if you're walking, you're able to breathe, you're able to control your breathing. So I can only assume, especially if you're walking at more of an incline where your heart rate is racing, you would be taking in a lot more oxygen versus sprinting up that exact same incline. Wouldn't that have an effect on burning fat more?
Again, it's looking at not only the intensity, but the overall oxygen consumption. Now, if your heart's racing walking up a hill, you probably should not be sprinting up that hill.
Correct.
You're better off walking until that heart rhythm is starting to drop a bit during that exercise, because especially for somebody who is significantly out of shape, you may be putting yourself at a risk of magnifying an unknown heart condition. And so, monitor your heart rate, and that should be the guide as to the intensity that we're doing. And with regards to sprinting, yes, sprinting is more anaerobic, but it also is a much higher intensity, so it has better overall performance benefits. You are burning the same calories going up that hill faster, so you're doing it in a shorter period of time, and you may also be burning more calories in the long haul because there's that recovery piece where we're also consuming oxygen and consuming calories. If you recall, as we talk about like the transition of oxygen consumption from rest to steady state, there's that period of oxygen deficit, and we are relying more on anaerobic metabolism during that period of time. Now, an unfit individual is going to spend more time in that oxygen deficit, so they're in a more anaerobic state anyhow. So, the initial period of running or walking is going to still be more or less anaerobic. Once we hit steady state, and again, that steady state, if you're sprinting up that hill, is not going to be very long because we just simply cannot rely on anaerobic metabolism for a long period of time. So you're not likely to exercise for as long, which may mean that you don't do as much exercise. So you have to kind of balance out what's the total cumulative effect. If I sprint up that hill, or if I'm doing, say, interval type of training, doing more of a tempo training where I'm picking up my speed and then slowing down, picking up, slowing down, I may actually end up burning more calories because I can do more overall intensity, cover more distance in that period of time, and in recovery, I am burning more calories, but that's where I'm consuming the oxygen as I replace the adenosine triphosphate in the skeletal muscle. I'm doing that during recovery. And so that's why you see sprinters, when they finish sprinting, they're huffing and puffing. They may actually be breathing heavier longer than somebody who walks the same distance. I mean, you walk 100 yards, it might take you, I don't know how long, it could take maybe 30 seconds or more, maybe even longer than that. But sprinting it might be, for us, maybe 12, 15 seconds, Usain Bolt, a few seconds. But, when you finish, probably not going to be breathing as heavy. And so the caloric expenditure, the stress on the heart is probably much lower for that person walking that distance than the person who sprinted that distance. Because the heart, again, is going to have to step in and recover. I think it's a bit of a misnomer that sprinters don't consume oxygen. They don't need a certain level of VO2. Now, they're not going to be performing at as high of an oxygen consumption level as an endurance runner. But endurance runners, you look now at the people running the marathons, people winning the marathons are, they're starting to push down towards that 4-minute mile mark for 26 miles. So they're going pretty darn fast. And so it's really, when you talk walk versus run versus sprint, it's really a bit more of a matter of intensity, and that intensity is going to be very individualized. I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
Well, I think that's what's so cool about walking being low intense is, I think it would be really captivating for our audience who kind of have a sedentary lifestyle. Maybe they have a job where they're at a computer literally all day long, and they know that, it's time to make a change. It's time to start focusing on my health, but I don't really have a lot of time to go to the gym. But now I do have time to go to the gym, and I don't know where to start. I think walking is actually a good foundation for those baby steps that we talked about in order to get active, get moving. You mentioned that simply parking at the farthest end of a parking lot can, in the long run, have huge benefits. There's actually me looking up some research about walking. I had no idea, but there's actually a huge walking community where people will literally just get together in groups and then just walk, whether it's mall walking, walking around your local park, the local neighborhoods. Some they'll meet up and do hikes with each other. Like there's kind of a cool way to connect with a community of walkers. And I think not only does that open the door for fitness, because obviously it's free. Anyone can walk. You can walk anywhere. It's cheap. You don't have to worry about a gym membership. But there are community outreaches where you can build those relationships of people who want to walk, they want to move as well. And I think that's a really cool concept as well. What's your opinion? Because last time we talked about, when we were on the subject of adult beverages, having that social experience, let's kind of talk about that social factor. I know a lot of people, they like to work out by themselves, but me, I need a gym buddy. Like if I'm in the gym, I need to have that motivational accountability buddy. What do you think about that?
Well, I think everybody's different. And I do agree there needs to be as many social encounters as we can have in, our days, our weeks, our months, and so on. It's not always going to be the same for everybody. And, with regards to the gym buddy, I've been let down too often by people who, want to work out with me and then don't show up. Having worked in the fitness industry for so many years, when I go to the gym and, you see people that could use some help correcting technique and things like that, my professional side kicks in, and it just, it bothers me, and I just want to be private. I want to get my workouts done. And so I work out in my own garage, which also is beneficial for me in that I don't have to waste more time. I already spend enough time commuting to and from work and, getting the kids to school and sporting practices and things like that I don't want to have to drive to a gym to work out. I can just go down in the garage. I can do it anytime. I can do it first thing in the morning. I don't have to worry about gyms being open. I don't have to worry about having a governor that decides to close the gyms during a pandemic because it's not healthy to be healthy. But and that's a totally different rant for me. But, that's me. Other people like yourself need that camaraderie. When it comes to that social piece of walking, again, you have to evaluate what is the goal of doing what you're doing. And for many people, I can drive around on the weekends and see these groups of people out walking, but, unless I'm misjudging their current fitness capacity, I would say that many of them are getting social benefit, but they're not getting physiological benefit, because they're just simply not walking to an intensity that should be driving an improvement in VO2 max. Now they're burning calories, which is great. But again, if burning calories are your goal, what is the best path to optimize that fat loss? I would say that for most, that if you really want to improve your body composition, weightlifting should be a priority. So in that case, if you're trying to increase muscle mass, walking can be a good activity to burn additional calories, but you're not going to see dramatic improvements in your VO2 max. But again, it's better than not doing anything, like a lot of bodybuilders and powerlifters might do. And doing intensive cardio might not be beneficial for those individuals' goals. So you have to look individually. What are you trying to accomplish? And, again, it takes more time. So when you talk about somebody who has little time to exercise, how are you going to best optimize that time to get the benefits that you need? And, walking 4 miles at 15 minutes is an hour of exercise. Sometimes that's all people have available to exercise. So is that the best choice to improve their overall fitness? So they're not doing something that is improving the skeletal muscle endurance, skeletal muscle strength, Probably not flexibility. Walking does not benefit flexibility very much at all unless you're going to stretch afterwards. And it may have, some effect on body composition. But again, it's affecting the fat content, not necessarily the muscular content. And I think if you neglect doing some kind of strengthening exercise, then you are overall diminishing your capacity to continue to do a moderately high level of activity as you age, because you're going to have the natural sarcopenia, the loss of muscle mass as you age, that is not being countered by some kind of resistance training. And walking, might be lowering your fat content, but it's also not really benefiting your muscle mass. And so I think, we have to look at the big picture. Walking in itself is a great physical activity, like you've said, and I think it's something that we should be doing more of. But, we have to consider, if we're doing that in a more, kind of regulated or more scheduled pattern, and schedule is probably not the right word, but, we're looking at that as being our exercise, because there's exercise and there's physical activity. And exercise is time that is set aside for the specific goals of improving performance, improving health, or improving body composition. Physical activity is just any movement above rest. And so from a physical activity standpoint, I would say that the walking as much as we can is a very good thing to do. From a performance standpoint, from a body composition standpoint, and depending on what all you're doing from a health standpoint, it may not necessarily be the best thing as an exercise. So you have to consider what are you trying to do and what's the purpose of it. And if you can walk more by simply taking the stairs instead of the elevator, walking more in the parking lot, or parking your car further away from work or school, whatever you're doing, taking as much opportunity to get your legs moving, that's going to have benefit, but it's not necessarily exercise. It's just simply physical activity. Now, if you are just starting out and you want to get some exercise, it's a great way to begin to exercise. But at some point, you have to consider, what is the next step to improving my performance? Not necessarily walking less, but doing other activities that can benefit you in the broader sense.
I agree. I think, that was kind of the point of this, is walking, although you're saying it's not necessarily exercise, it is a form of physical activity, but it could be that base foundation of someone's exercise journey. It could be like the very, very start of it. You mentioned how here in Oregon, we did have a governor that did shut a lot of gyms down due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But with walking, there's really no excuse, right? You can still move outside. There's no restraints to it. Yeah, maybe the weather, maybe it's raining, but you know what? There are other ways. You could walk on a treadmill. You can increase the incline on a treadmill. You can walk in your local park, assuming that it's in a safe neighborhood. You can walk around that neighborhood. You can go hiking. You can walk on the beach. You can on your lunch break. You know what? It's a beautiful day. Let's go walk. Let's move, right? There's not a lot of restraints to walking, even in your office space. Try to make it a daily habit. Set a little timer on your phone where it dings every 15 minutes and you're like, okay, I'm going to walk to make an effort to walk to the water cooler. Those little steps add up. And if it's a base foundation of someone's exercise journey, I'd say go for it, right?
Well, I'm not saying, that you're not right there, but I'm saying, it is the very base, and it is the beginning. It's, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step.
Correct.
But I want everybody to be aware that it is not necessarily exercise. There is a difference between exercise and physical activity. And so at some point, you want to have a plan for progression in your exercise, and just simply kind of walking the same distance, the same speed, week after week, day after day, whatever it might be, is not going to be beneficial. There has to be a progression to it. And that's where, if we start our fitness journey with walking, that's great. But find ways, how can I begin to increase the intensity? I have to pick up my pace. I have to walk a little bit faster. I mean, there's a lot of times when I'm walking those dogs, and I'm not walking it for cardiovascular fitness, but I find myself walking much, much faster than people who are out there dressed as if they are exercising. Now, again, I'm making a judgment based on appearances, and I may be entirely wrong, but they definitely appear as if they could be going a little bit faster and pushing themselves a little bit harder. Now, again, you can't know everybody's circumstances just based on their appearance, but for the most part, unless somebody is severely diseased cardiovascularly, or they have some other physical limitation that prohibits them from, walking faster or, at a brisker pace or walking uphill, most people could probably go a little bit faster. When I see people with their Starbucks cups, they kind of, you see them walking to Starbucks and coming back, which is fine. And I would much prefer to see people walk there and back rather than drive, because that's going to be some physical activity. But if you're considering that exercise, it's probably not exercise. If you can walk back with a hot cup of coffee in your hand and drink that coffee, you're probably not at an intensity that is adequate to improve your performance. Again, it's going to have a little bit of health benefit, but the health benefit is really marginalized. So consider, what can I do to progress this further? And things that you could do is add body weight to you. So maybe a backpack with a little bit of weight in it or something like that. Or, find a course that is going to be hilly. If you're walking simply around a track, see people do that. Now, I've seen people that can walk, they're walking a really brisk pace around the track. That's awesome, because they're picking it up. I see one guy in my neighborhood that kind of does more of a race walking kind of thing. That's getting the whole body moving. But there has to be a progression in there. And if there's not, then it's not exercise anymore. It's just simply physical activity. And I would want people to also consider other activities for exercise. And if exercise needs to be planned and scheduled, then do the difficult things in that planned, scheduled time. If you want to go to the gym, and get a gym membership, go use the weights, maybe use other cardio equipment for, the intensity benefits that you can get out of it, the interval benefits that you can get out of it. But focus probably more on using the weights, and use the rest of your day to try and increase your activity and walk more. You're going to get far better benefit out of that than, if you see people who will drive 5 miles to the gym to walk like 3 miles on a treadmill. Why didn't you just walk your neighborhood? You're spending a lot of money for that gym membership. Use it wisely. Now, if you're going to use the treadmill so that you can walk up a pretty steep grade and get a really intensive workout, then yeah, that's good. I mean, I've enjoyed, I like walking on a treadmill more than running most of the times, because I can take benefit of the hills. I can't walk outside enough to get any cardiovascular benefit, but I can walk pretty briskly up a steep hill, and I'm going to get a workout.
You mentioned walking to the gym, and it's really funny. There was actually a I would say a pretty famous YouTuber by the name of Will Tennyson, and he's always trying to do these either his own personal exercise challenges or physical activity challenges in order to just kind of gather data and just really, really stick to the science. And he did one social experiment on himself where he's like, okay, I'm not going to drive. I'm just going to walk everywhere. No matter how long it takes, if I have to wake up early and walk to the gym, I'm going to do it. And what he discovered was, I mean, he was burning way, 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 way more calories than, and I think that's really interesting. I do agree. I think everyone should increase their intensity. Like if walking is just going to be that baby step, that foundation to get you active, by all means. But I do think there is going to be a point where it's like, okay, I either need to pick it up to a fast walk, or I need to incorporate weights, or whatever the case may be. But building that foundation, what about going into another realm where it's not necessarily building a foundation, more for balance and stability, such as our geriatric listeners, right? Or that adult elderly community who have a really hard time with lifting weights or resistance training, but it would definitely behoove them to get active. I think walking would be a really good, not even a start, I guess I would say, with them, but a really good form of physical activity for them to at least get blood flow moving, help with their heart strength, and like, what's the word I'm looking for? Regulate their diabetes. Because if you're walking, you're going to be pushing blood flow throughout the body, meaning you're going to be regulating your sugar within the blood. That's going to help with that. That would have an impact on blood sugar levels, which is going to help with the diabetic community.
Okay, well, you're really presenting a lot of things in that statement. I mean, first, you're kind of assuming that the elderly are all frail and diabetic.
No.
And that's really not the case. And I think, that it is important is, we are talking about, aging well. That people understand that because you are hitting a certain age does not mean you have to have a diminished capacity to do different things. That, suddenly because I am, in my 60s, I'm not there yet. I have another year and a couple months. But, that when I'm in my 60s that, I shouldn't be lifting weights anymore. And I really probably, running is not good for my joints. So I should be, starting to just think about walking. Well, you're going to end up seeing people who have a greater decline in performance because they've given up the things that they're actually capable of doing. And so, yes, walking should be that gateway exercise to getting active. If you have been doing nothing, then walking is going to have tremendous benefits. And if you start walking, you're going to see some improvement. But again, there has to be progression in that. And I would argue that strength training is probably more important to the aging population than getting out and walking will be. Because if you can build up muscular strength and muscular endurance, you're going to be able to walk more and you're going to be able to walk faster, and it's going to have an effect on your cardiovascular system. If I simply walk and I don't do other things to make my capacity to walk better, then I'm not going to progress in overall health and fitness. And so I think it's important to be very individualized in the exercise prescription and, consider what all that individual needs. And for the geriatric community, which, this podcast is intended for really everybody from birth to the grave. And, how we exercise is really going to depend on where we're starting from, what our current fitness level is and what are we capable of doing. And, for some elderly, walking may not necessarily be the best starting activity because maybe they have limited balance or gait situations. Parkinson's disease, for example. Somebody going out walking may not necessarily be the best thing for something with Parkinson's because, your gait is affected. But maybe riding a stationary bike is going to have a little bit better benefit. I just heard something recently this week, and I need to research it a little bit more. But there is some research, and let me see if I can get it all correctly, that they're looking at neural pathways in diseases like Parkinson's, where they feel like there may be some intact pathways in the brain that can be tapped into in situations where there's like more positive emotional stimulation. And they talked about a gentleman who, Parkinson's, so he had the typical festation gait, poor posture, put him on a bike and he'd ride the bike and no problems whatsoever. And this is not a stationary bike, but a bicycle. And he could ride it without any problem. But as soon as he got off that bike, immediately went back to that festation gait. And so, there's some benefits in doing the things that we really kind of enjoy, but are also going to benefit us in terms of improving our balance, improving coordination, and I think, improving speed and power also. Those are two other factors that tend to get neglected in the aging population as we look at what can we do to be more fit in a neuromotor respect, as well as, a health respect. And so, again, evaluate what is the best for that individual and what are they going to get the most overall benefit for. But obviously, of course, walk as much as possible. It's always sad if you see, a nursing home or hospitals where people are just kind of sitting in chairs watching TV rather than being involved, engaged in activities that can get them kind of walking around. Even if, it's a very, very slow walk, it's going to have a benefit to them. But again, it's where are they at? Where are we trying to get to? That determines the degree to which we do what we do.
I agree. And I actually hope one day we do have a podcast where we talk about Parkinson's, because I'm actually certified with the Brian Grant Foundation on training individuals with Parkinson's through what exercises do work best for them. And yes, you are correct as far as resistance training in the Parkinson's group is great benefits, especially even acts of like boxing style training with jump ropes or the movement of punching. That is a huge breakthrough within the last couple years with individuals with Parkinson's. I don't want to get too much on that topic because I can literally talk.
Well, we have a guest that we'll be scheduling here shortly that it will speak to all that.
So I was reading a study that was found in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. One of the authors was David Neiman, Drew Hinson, Melanie Austin, and Wei Shaw. And what they were discussing within that small study, it was only a study of like 100 participants. They had come to the conclusion that with walking, it actually strengthened an individual's immune system, and it was able to prevent them from getting respiratory infections during flu season. Now, what I thought was really interesting, because it was so small, I was wondering, did it tie in with walking per se, or did it tie in with those individuals being exposed to the elements of just being outside and just having that exposure of the cold, or having the exposure of springtime with just all the pollen? I couldn't, reading that, I could not come up with the conclusion of how they truly connected it with walking, but I wanted to know your opinion on that, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. Everyone's trying to figure out ways to really increase their immune system right now. Do you see that walking would be beneficial for an individual to increase their overall immune health?
Well, yes, to be quick, yeah, the walking will definitely have a benefit in improving one's immune system. Now, there are a number of different studies that Dr. Neiman has done over the years. You might recall from Physiology of Exercise, Neiman's J. And I don't believe that's the study from which that came, but he has done numerous studies. And I'm also not sure if that particular study, they were exercising outside, what exposure they had to the elements. But knowing Dr. Neiman's research, I would say that it is not so much the modality of the exercise that is important. It is the intensity of the exercise that drives the benefits in terms of the immune system. So it doesn't matter whether you're walking, running, biking, stair-stepping, indoors, outdoors. If we look at the benefits of exercise, again, there's a bit of a continuum in exercise from being totally sedentary to extreme exercise, long duration, high intensities, and so on. And so if we consider that the sedentary individual has an average risk of an upper respiratory tract infection, and I would include in that COVID falls into that category. There's a little bit more nuance in regards to COVID because we know that the way it attacks the immune system, people who are, have immune disorders are definitely at risk, that it might be a little bit different than specifically the Neiman study, and he's looking at upper respiratory tract infections, so that can be anything from a cold to flu and things like that. But a sedentary individual has a average risk of upper respiratory tract infections. As we move to a more moderate intensity, moderate duration of exercise, that significantly drops the risk of upper respiratory tract infection. And then from that point, as the exercise intensity and duration begins to increase, it actually steps it up to where the individual who is exercising very intensely for very long durations actually has an elevated risk of upper respiratory tract infection. And so the appropriate amount of activity needs to be considered in terms of what effect is that going to have on the immune system. And, if we're looking at COVID-19, which we're, still kind of, I hope not in the middle of anymore, but we are definitely in the throes of, when considering activity, we want to make sure that we are doing a moderate amount. I've known of people who have said, well, this person was healthy and they got COVID really bad. Well, were they really healthy? In one situation, a friend had presented as an example a daughter of a friend who was a collegiate swimmer. And I'm like, well, okay, there you go. You're a D1 swimmer, a Division I collegiate swimmer. You are not training moderately at all. You are training intensely, and you're compounding that with the stress of school, whatever social stresses there might be, a lack of sleep. And unless they're going to a school that had a tremendous budget, the athletes are not on any kind of food program. They may have nutritionists and things like that, but as you recall, probably being a college student, the food budget was small,
it was terrible.
And you weren't eating great food. And so, and as an athlete,
I think I actually complained about it almost every class when we started talking about nutrition and the benefits. And I was like, well, what if we can only afford Top Ramen?
Yeah, well, that's a different topic. I could come back to that here in a moment, but and maybe that's a whole episode. And I'll bring John McGuire back for that one because he'll attest to my food budget when we were roommates in New York, and I ate very healthy on a very, 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 very small budget. So it's doable. It just takes a little bit of effort. But athletes are also generally pushed into close proximity, or spending time in the locker room, and there's some debate now whether the degree to which the window of opportunity exists, or the open window theory, I should say, exists. And that's where after an intense bout of exercise, you have a period of suppressed immune system response. The body's kind of recovering from the exercise. It's a recent study, and I can't quote who it was. I'd have to look it up, but that they found it really wasn't a case that there was an increase in illness because of the open window theory. But it seems reasonable that for a moderate amount of exercise, you're going to boost that immune system during that exercise, and for a brief period afterwards, if it's just a moderate amount. But if it's more intense exercise, there's going to be a bit more of a suppression post-workout that, usually within a couple hours, you're going to be back up to normal. But, if you're exposed within that time immediately after, say, intensive practice and somebody's infected, you're more likely to get infected. You're putting athletes on a close bus. They're going to be exposed to a greater extent. And so in that case, it didn't really surprise me that the athlete, got COVID. But did they get severely ill? No. And if you look at a lot of the research that's out there, not only is it people who are doing a moderate amount of exercise are well protected, or better protected, I should say, because it really depends on where your starting point is. But your risk is going to be reduced significantly with a moderate amount of exercise. But there's also a significant amount of research that shows that your risk is also reduced when you have a moderate body mass index. And again, the body mass index can be a bit iffy depending on how you're looking at it or what you're looking at. But for the most part, if you look at the whole picture of everybody, the whole population, people who are going to have a very low BMI are people who are under-muscled or under-fat, which both cases are likely to increase your risk of illness. If you're under-muscled, it probably means that you're closer to sedentary, but you're just not, overly fat to where you're on the obese side or the over-fat side. Or if you're under-muscled, you say maybe a bodybuilder or somebody like that or a runner who is really living at a very, very low percent body fat, which is going to increase your risk of illness. But a moderate BMI can indicate that you have a little bit of body fat that's protective, but you also have muscle mass in there as well. And so a BMI of somewhere probably between about 23 and 26, I consider to be kind of the sweet spot for overall health. And those individuals...
For men or women?
For men and women, and across the ages. I mean, a couple of studies looked at things like risk of COVID infection, risk of hospitalization, being in an ICU, being in a ventilator, and death. And across the board, there was, again, that kind of Neiman's J curve that was reflected in the BMI. And so when we're looking at the benefits in the immune system, moderate exercise, moderate amount of muscle mass, moderate amount of body fat, again, moderate being just, in a healthy range, you're going to be you're going to be less susceptible to upper respiratory tract infections. So I don't know that the Neiman study really is focusing in on I know he's not focusing on the fact that you're exposed to the elements, because that would have confounded his study. He was looking specifically at exercise intensity and how that was impacting the immune system response. Now, not going to any specific literature, but even more I could probably find the literature, but I generally kind of favor the 5-second rule when it comes to bacteria and viral infection and things like that. It's like, and my kids were never really that sick because I didn't worry about, oh, that was on the floor, don't eat that, right? But I kind of use that 5-second rule in quotation marks. I mean, I'm obviously not encouraging people to drop things on the floor and eat it, but that desire to avoid yourself of any kind of viral exposure is not healthy. That moderate bit of exposure is also boosting the immune system as well. Now, that doesn't have anything to do with walking or, the type of exercise that you're doing, but the immune system, in a sense, kind of needs its little bit of exercise, but it doesn't want to be over exercised. It doesn't want to be overstressed. But if you have small little exposures, that is actually building up the T cell and B cell memory that when you are exposed to upper respiratory tract infections, you're going to have a much stronger response.
One last thing that I kind of want to end on, going back to the category of benefits of walking. And I actually found this in a study that was found inside the Experimental Psychology, Learning, Memory, and Cognitive Journal. This was a study that was done back in 2014 by M. Opezzo and D. L. Schwartz. And what they had discussed is the psychological benefits of walking. One, if you're super, super stressed out and you're just like, this is overwhelming, go on a walk. Just walk, and just getting that act of moving, and eventually it's going to relieve the stress. It also, in their study, it was found that it actually increases those creative juices. It allows an individual to kind of think and process things through, but they're also, without even realizing it, they're getting those levels of dopamine, just the exposure to me, for example. I walked, I live next to a park, which is just so happens to be on this little creek. And I was able to see like how the sun was setting and just reflecting off the creek. There were a few beavers that were kind of swimming, and it was just a really, really amazing sight to see. But yes, in their study, that was what I found the most interesting about walking, is also the mental health side effect. It like I said, in their study, it was allowing individuals to have more of that creative juices. So if an individual has writer block or they're stressed out from work, just simply adding a walk to their daily routine kind of eliminated that writer's block, allowed an individual to really get that creative juices going. Or if someone needed help with being motivated again, well, just that walk and just processing, okay, I'm really stressed out about work. Going through the motions of walking and just thinking about how am I going to overcome this stress? How can I set this goal? How can I process that? As the individuals that were in that study, they showed a dramatic increase of cognitive ability. Their moods all changed, and it was an overall stress reliever. I definitely think, again, going back to how I started off this podcast, was I think walking is just completely underrated. Yeah, it's not as beneficial physically as like lifting weights or doing those sprints, but there are other elements that can be thrown in to the mix. You saying that, yeah, I walk my dogs. Did you have one of those mental breakthroughs where you're like, this is kind of peaceful, or you know what, I got to grade these papers, I got to do this class? Did it allow you to find that headspace of kind of, all right, I got this?
Perhaps that's not really why I'm kind of walking the dogs. I'm sure there are times walking that I, kind of are able to think things through, and that may be, beneficial. I think, again, when we're talking any form of exercise or activity, we have to think of the principle of specificity. Why are we doing it? What are we intending to do? And there are benefits in so many different things that we can do that we have to weigh the benefits along with what our goals are. And if they're accomplishing our goals, they're going to be great. If they're not accomplishing the goals, great. So there's definitely, psychological and mental health benefits to walking. And that's why I think walk as much as possible. But again, if the goals are fitness, evaluate, is this accomplishing those goals? Never walk less because you're too fit for walking. You can still keep walking, you still get those benefits. I have known many people who get that same kind of mental clarity from running. I don't. When I exercise, my mind is on the contraction of the muscle that I'm trying to build, or the speed at which I'm running, my heart rate, the am I reaching the goals of performance? So exercise to me isn't necessarily that mental outlet. Physical activity is. If I'm out for a hike, that's a lot different. And sometimes, even for me, it's hard to disengage from the exercise mentality and engage in, just walking for the sake of enjoying the environment. My wife always complains when we go kayaking together, or I complain, it depends whose perspective you're looking at, but she tends to paddle for the engagement with the environment around her. I paddle for how fast am I going, what's my speed, what muscles am I contracting, and I'm still focused physiologically. And so I don't necessarily reap the benefits that are around me. Now, there are times when I go and I can just relax and just kind of look at nature and do those types of things. So it really depends on what are you trying to accomplish. And I would say that if you are engaged in the environment around you, there may not be as much of a benefit from that health, or from that activity, for your health and performance. Mental health, obviously, yes, it will. But that, again, is going to depend on the individual. I know a lot of distance runners who, they are perhaps addicted to that runner's high, but they enjoy exercise. And I just don't enjoy exercise. I think I've mentioned before, I'm that, 2x4 to the head kind of person, that I do it not because I enjoy it, but because, I feel so good when I'm finished.
He says this, and he's in incredibly good shape, by the way, just for those that are listening to the podcast. Well,
there's a reason I do an audio podcast rather than a YouTube podcast, because I have more of a face and a body for radio than I do for television. So I'm not that incredibly in shape. But, it is, I'd probably be even worse if I didn't take that approach to, really emphasizing the exercise. And that's where I think and I'm older than you too. So I can look at, as an exercise physiologist who exercises and who is aging, as we're all aging, but I can look at it from a perspective of where would I be if I did it differently? And I know for a fact that if I took on a more sedentary approach to exercise, I would be in far worse shape. My body composition would be higher, my muscle mass would be much, much lower, and I would not be able to move quite as well. And so I have found that I'm aging better because I'm focused on the progressive overload of the exercise. And when I walk, I still walk briskly. I try and, do it a little bit faster because I know I still want to get a little bit of cardiovascular benefit from that. From a mental standpoint, I probably should slow down and, kind of just enjoy the environment. But I don't. And so that's probably one of my limitations. But there are, times when I will. I have a different opportunity too, having an hour commute. If I can disengage from the horrible drivers in the Northwest, sorry folks, but I could enjoy my commute a little bit better. And that's another way that I can just kind of embrace the environment. I mean, there's times I've driven to work and I've seen like multiple rainbows. I remember one time early on traveling to Western Oregon University that driving into campus, first time in my life I ever saw a full ground-to-ground rainbow. And, that's just fascinating. A few years ago, it was a rainy day like it always is in Portland. And I was driving near my home and, there are a lot of pine needles on the road, and the mixture of the rain and the cars driving over it, you can actually smell those pine needles. And, so I enjoyed that moment of kind of engaging with the environment. I don't always do it and probably could do it better, but, there are other ways that I take advantage of those meditative opportunities. But, getting out walking for meditative purposes has tremendous benefits, but the benefits are not necessarily going to be in the realm of physical health, cardiorespiratory endurance, muscle endurance, but definitely be in the benefit of psychological health.
I would slightly disagree with that. I think you're right. It does have more of the benefit of the psychological health, but I think that ties in with the physical health. For example, if you have an individual that's on a weight loss journey and they're like, my goal is to lose weight, and they're killing themselves in the gym, they're doing everything right, but they aren't seeing those results right away. A good majority of the time, I think it's like 85% of the time, when individuals, they don't see those results, they quit. With walking, I know it sounds silly, but it's almost like you're seeing your results almost daily. So if you, for example, walked on a hike and, oh man, this sucks, this is absolutely terrible, and then you get all the way up to the top of the summit, well, you're kind of seeing a reward of what you just did. You're like, wow, what a beautiful view. I completely killed myself moving up this hill that was like at a 19% incline, but man, this is super rewarding. Or let's just say you walk around your neighborhood, and with the luxury of having a smartphone, you mapped out everything that you did. Wow, I just went on like a 6 or 7 mile hike, or not hike, just 6 or 7 mile walk around my neighborhood. That's awesome. Again, that's physical activity, but it's just those little tiny psychological tricks of motivating yourself. Like, well, what else can I do? I know I mentioned those individuals where they have walking groups. Some of them will try and walk neighborhoods to create art on their path. So they'll try and create like a smiley face, or they'll try and create like a dragon or a Ninja Turtle, or whatever the case may be. They'll try and create something, but it's rewarding to them because they're like, wow, not only did I just walk 26 miles in a day, I also mapped it out and I created a Tyrannosaurus Rex with my walking. So it's just kind of that psychological factor that motivates people to keep going, to keep challenging themselves, to keep pushing it in that physical activity, transitioning into physical fitness realm. I think that psychological factor, those benefits of that, of the individual reaping those benefits, are actually going to carry into being motivated to do physical exercises.
True, but again, and we're going to keep going. This will be a 2-hour podcast if we keep going this route. I think it's important to kind of end with a clear statement that exercise is very diverse. There are multiple facets of what is exercise. There are multiple components to health, both physical, mental, we talk spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social wellness. Those are all separate components. And, as I like to consider them, I consider it as well-centered fitness, that those all need to be in balance. And we can equally become unbalanced by doing too much in one area and not in the others. And, so you mentioned somebody walking 26 miles in a day. If you're walking 26 miles just to make shapes of Ninja Turtles, that may be good for your psychological benefit, but it is not, the diminishing return in regards to physical health and performance is going to be much, much smaller. That time could be spent doing so much other stuff that can not only benefit you, but maybe other people. Being able to map out a Ninja Turtle, that's great. But who has that helped? Has it helped your physical goals? It may have helped your psychological goals. You had some fun, you had some social activity with it, but that can't be the only focus in exercise. We have to consider the balance. And so, walking is a great starting point for exercise. We need to consider progression and overload. That in order for the body system to adapt, it has to be stressed to a level greater than that to which it is accustomed. And so if you've been walking for 2 years and you're still walking the same distance in the same time, you have not progressed yourself physically one iota beyond probably the first few weeks of that activity. Psychologically, yeah, and socially, you might have reaped some benefits. That's awesome. But consider what else you can be doing to progress that. What other activities can we begin to incorporate into our lifestyle to better accomplish a broader improvement in our health and our aging? And try and do more and try and find ways to kind of enjoy doing more. I think there's as much accomplishment in, lifting a little bit more than, you did the workout before. And I think at the end of a lifting workout, you do see some of the same progress. You might not see the spectacular view that you might see from the top of a mountain in a hike, but we should still take advantage of each of those individual accomplishments that we're doing every time we're doing some level of physical activity, for overcoming the things that are making us weaker, but if we're overcoming our individual limitations, then we're accomplishing something, and we should take pride and joy in that. And there can be as much sense of accomplishment in whatever we're doing, but we have to consider that one activity alone is not going to solve all of our mental and physical and emotional health issues. And so we'll end on that, because this is probably the longest podcast we have ever done. And I thank everyone for listening, and keep aging well.
Keep aging well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.